Okay, continuing with Les Mis. Hopefully I get the angles right and everything. So we're starting on book 4. To trust is sometimes to surrender. One mother meets another. Now, part of this we skim, so I'll let you know where, because we skim like a couple different paragraphs. So, during the first quarter of the present century at Montfermeil, near Paris, there was a cheap tavern, which is no longer there. It was kept by a man and wife named Thénardier, in the Rue Boulanger. Above the door, nailed flat against the wall, was a board on which something was painted that looked like a man carrying on his back another man wearing the heavy epaulets of a general, gilt, and with large silver stars. Red blotches signified blood. The rest of the picture was smoke, and probably represented a battle. At the base of this inscription was the Sergeant of Waterloo. Nothing is more ordinary than a cart or wagon in front of the door to an inn. Nevertheless, the vehicle, or more properly speaking, the fragment of a vehicle obstructing the street in front of the Sergeant of Waterloo, one evening in the spring of 1818, certainly, by its bulk, would have attracted the attention of any passing painter. Okay, and then we skip the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, because all they are is talking about the cart itself, and there are a couple children at the cart. A cleverly tied bandana kept them from falling off. A mother, seeing this frightful chain, had said, "Now there's a toy for my children." The radiant children, attractively dressed, were like two roses twined on the rusty iron, with their perfect, sparkling eyes and their fresh, laughing faces. One was a rosy blonde, and the other a brunette, their artless faces two delightful surprises. The perfume shed by a flowering shrub near by seemed their own breath. The smaller one had her pretty little stomach bared with the chaste indecency of infancy. Above and around the delicate heads, steeped in joy and bathed in light, the gigantic hulk, black with rust and almost frightful with its tangled curves and sharp angles, arched like the mouth of a cave. The mother, a woman whose appearance was somewhat forbidding, but touching at this moment, was sitting on the doorstep of the inn, swinging the two children by a long rope, tenderly following them with her eyes, for fear of accident, with that animal yet celestial expression peculiar to motherhood. At each swing the hideous lynx let out a strident noise, like an angry cry. The little ones were in ecstasy. The setting sun mixed with the joy, and nothing could be more charming than this whim that made of a Titan's chain a swing for angels. While rocking the children, the mother sang, out of tune, a then popular song, Il le faut de c'est une guerrière. Singing and watching her children prevented her from hearing and seeing what was going on in the street. Someone, however, had approached her as she was beginning the first couplet of the song, and suddenly she heard a voice say quite near her ear, "You have two lovely children, madam." Okay, the Thénardiers are extremely important, so make sure you pull quotes on not only the mother but the children as well. "À la belle et tendre Imogène," answered the mother, singing then she turned her head. A woman was standing in front of her a few steps away. She also had a child in her arms. Woman is also very important. In addition, she was carrying a large carpet bag, which seemed heavy. This woman's child was the loveliest creature imaginable, a little girl of 2 or 3. She could have competed with the other little ones for the most appealing attire. There were ribbons at her shoulders, and Valenciennes lace above the fine linen wings of her cap. The folds of her skirt were raised enough to show her plump white thighs. She was charmingly rosy and healthful. One wanted to nibble at the pretty little creature's cheeks. We can say nothing of her eyes, except they must have been large and had lashes. She was asleep. She was sleeping in the most absolutely confident slumber of her age. Mother's arms are made of tenderness, and sweet sleep blesses the child who lies within. As for the mother, she seemed poor and sad. She looked like a working woman intending to return to peasant life. She was young and pretty, possibly, but in her clothes beauty could not show through. Her hair, one blonde mesh of which had slipped loose, seemed very thick, but it was severely fastened up beneath an ugly, tight nun's headdress, tied under the chin. Laughing shows fine teeth when one has them, but she did not laugh. Her eyes seemed not to have been tearless for a long time. She was pale, she looked very weary and somewhat sick. She gazed at her child, asleep in her arms, with that look peculiar to a mother who nurses her own child. Her figure was clumsily masked by a large blue kerchief, like those used by invalids, folded across her bosom. Her hands were tanned and spotted with freckles, the forefinger hardened and pricked with the needle. She wore a coarse brown wool mantle, a calico dress, and heavy shoes. It was Fantine. Yes, Fantine. Hard to recognize, yet with a closer look you could see she still retained her beauty. A sad line, like a touch of irony, had marked her right cheek. As for her clothing, that airy web of muslin and ribbons that seemed made of gaiety, folly, and music, full of baubles and perfumed with lilacs, that had vanished like the beautiful sparkles of hoarfrost which we take for diamonds in the sun. They melt and leave the branch a dreary black smudge. 10 months has slipped by since the good joke. What happened during these 10 months we can well imagine. After recklessness comes trouble. Fantine had lost sight of favorites, Zavine and Dahlia. The tie broken by the men, loosened for the women. They would have been astonished if anyone had said 2 weeks later they were friends. They no longer had any reason to be so. Fantine was left alone. The father of her child gone. Alas, such partings are irrevocable. She found herself absolutely isolated, with the habit of labor lost, and the taste for pleasure acquired. Led by her liaison with the Tholomeys to disdain the simple work she knew how to do, she had neglected her opportunities. Now they were all gone. No resources. Fantine could scarcely read, and did not know how to write. She had only been taught in childhood how to sign her name. She had a letter written by a public letter writer to the Tholomeys, then a second, then a third. Tholomeys had replied to none of them. One day Fantine heard some old women saying, as they saw her child, "Do people ever take such children seriously? They only shrug their shoulders at them." Then she thought of the Tholomeys, who shrugged his shoulders at his child, and who did not take this innocent creature seriously, and her heart turned dark at the place that had been this. But what should she do? She had no one to ask. She had made a mistake, but deep down we know she was modest and virtuous. She had a vague feeling of being on the brink of danger, of slipping into the streets. She had to have courage. She had it, and continued bravely. She had the idea of returning to her native village, Montreuil-sur-Mer. There perhaps someone would remember her and give her work. Yes, but she would have to hide her mistake. And she had a confused notion of a possible necessary separation, still more painful than the first. Her heart ached, but she made up her mind. We will see that Fantine possessed fierce courage. She had already valiantly given up her finery, was dressed in calico, and had put all her silks, her trinkets, her ribbons, and laces on her daughter, the only vanity that remained, and that a sacred one. She sold all she had, which gave her 200 francs. When her little debts were paid, she had only about 80 left. At 22 years of age, on a fine spring morning, she left Paris carrying her child on her back. Anyone seeing the two of them go by would have pitied them. The woman had nothing in the world but this child, and this child had nothing in the world but this woman. Fantine had nursed her child. That had weakened her chest somewhat, and she coughed slightly. We shall no further need to speak of Monsieur Felix Tholomyès. We will only say that 20 years later, so we can skim that. Next two paragraphs, so go to as she was passing. As she was passing by the Thénardier inn, the two little children, happily perched on their monstrous swing, had a dazzling effect upon her, and she paused before this vision of joy. Magic charms do exist. Those two little girls were one for this mother. Brimming with emotion, she watched them. The presence of angel is a herald of paradise. She thought she saw above this inn the mysterious here of Providence. These children were so clearly happy. She gazed at them, admired them, so much affected that, as the mother was taking a breath between verses of her song, she could not help saying what we have just read. You have two little lovely children there, madame. The most ferocious animals are disarmed by caresses to their young. The mother raised her head and thanked her, and made the stranger sit down on the stone step, she herself being in the doorway. The two women began to talk. My name is Madame Thénardier, said the mother of the two girls. We run this inn. Then, going on with her song, she sang between her teeth. This Madame Thénardier was a red-headed, large, but angular woman, the soldier's wife type in all its horror, with, strangely enough, a languid air gained from novel reading. She was unrefined, but simpering. Old romances impressed on the imagination of mistresses of restaurants have such effects. She was still young, scarcely 30. If this woman, now seated bent over, had been upright, perhaps her towering form and broad shoulders, those of a movable colossus, fit for a market woman, would have dismayed the traveller, disturbed her confidence, and prevented what we have to tell. A person seated instead of standing, fate hangs on just such a thread. The traveller told her story, somewhat modified. She said she was a working woman, her husband was dead. Unable to find a job in Paris, she was going to search for it elsewhere, in her own province. She had left Paris that morning on foot, carrying her child. She had become tired, and meeting the Villemomble stage, had gotten in. From Villemomble she had come on foot to Montfermeil. The child had walked a little, but not much. She was so young. She had to carry her, and the jewel had fallen asleep. And at these words she gave her daughter a passionate kiss, which waked her. The child opened her large eyes, blue, like her mother's, and saw what? Nothing, everything. With that serious, sometimes severe look of little children, which is one of the mysteries of their shining innocence before our shadowy virtues. It is as though they felt themselves angels and knew us to be human. Then the child began to laugh, and although the mother held her back, she slipped to the ground with the indomitable energy of a little one that wants to run around. All at once she caught sight of the two others in the swing, stopped short, and put out her tongue in token of admiration. Mother Thénardier untied the children and took them off the swing, saying, "Play together, the three of you." At that age acquaintance is easy, and in a moment the little Thénardiers were playing with the newcomer, digging holes in the ground to their intense delight. The newcomer was very cheerful. The goodness of the mother is written in the gaiety of the child. She had taken a small piece of wood, which she used as a spade, and was energetically digging a hole fit for a fly. The gravedigger's work is fun when done by a child. The two women went on chatting. "What's her name?" "Cosette." For Cosette read Euphrasie. The name of the little one was Euphrasie, but the mother had made Cosette out of it, by that sweet and charming instinct of mothers and of the people who changed Josepha into Pepita and Francois into Celeste. It's a kind of derivation that confuses and disconcerts the entire science of etymology. We knew a grandmother who succeeded in changing Theodore to Non. "How old is she?" "Going on 3 years. The same age as my first." The three girls were grouped in an attitude of profound anxiety and bliss. A great event had occurred. A large worm had come out of the ground. They were both afraid of it and in ecstasies over it. Their bright foreheads touching, 3 heads in one halo of glory. "Children," exclaimed the Thénardier mother, "how quickly they get to know one another. Look at them. One could swear they were 3 sisters." These words were the spark the mother was probably awaiting. She seized the hand of Madame Thénardier, looked right at her, and said, "Will you keep my child for me?" Madame Thénardier made a gesture of surprise, neither consent nor refusal. Cosette's mother went on, "You see, I can't take my child into the country. The work will prevent it. With a child I couldn't find a job there. They're so backward in that district. It is the good Lord who led me to your inn. The sight of your little one, so pretty and clean and happy, immediately overwhelmed me. I said, 'There's a good mother. They will be like 3 sisters, and then it will not be long before I come back. Will you keep my child for me?' 'I must think it over,' Madame Thénardier said. 'I will give 6 francs a month.' Here a man's voice was heard from within. 'Lot less than 7 francs, and 6 months paid in advance.' 6 times 7 is 42, the wife said. 'I'll pay it,' said the mother. 'And 15 francs extra for the first expenses,' added the man. 'That's 57 francs,' Madame Thénardier said, and in the midst of her reckoning she sang indistinctly, 'Il est fort de cette unguère.' 'I'll pay it,' said the mother. 'I have 80 francs. That will leave me enough to reach my part of the country if I walk. I'll earn some money there, and as soon as I have some I will come for my little love.' The man's voice responded, 'Does the child have clothes?' 'That's my husband,' said Madame Thénardier. 'Of course she has, the poor darling. I could tell it was your husband. And a fine wardrobe, too, an extravagant wardrobe. Everything in dozens. And silk dresses like a lady's. They're in my carrying bag.' 'You have to leave that here,' put in the man's voice. 'Of course, I'll give it to you. It would be,' said the mother, 'it would be odd if I left my child naked.' The face of the master appeared. 'All right,' he said. The bargain was concluded. The mother spent the night at the inn, gave her money, and left her child, repacked her bag, much lighter now, minus her child's clothes, and set off the next morning, expecting to return soon. These partings appear tranquil, but are full of despair. A neighbor of the Thénardiers met this mother on the street, after she had just left her child, and she came in saying, 'I've just met a woman in the street who was crying as if her heart would break.' When Cosette's mother had gone, the man said to his wife, That's enough for my debt of 110 francs, which falls due tomorrow. I was 50 francs short. Do you realize a sheriff would have come and they'd have brought charges against me? You've built a good mousetrap with your little ones, without even knowing it, the mother said. So we're going to go on to the next one, but we only read a little bit of the next one. The captured mouse was very puny, but the cat exults even over a lean mouse. What were the Thénardiers like? We will say just a word here. Later the sketch will be complete. They belong to that bastard class composed of rough people who have risen and intelligent people who have fallen, which lies between the so-called middle and lower classes, and unites some of the faults of the latter with nearly all the vices of the former, without possessing the generous impulses of the worker or the respectability of the bourgeois. They were among those dwarfish natures which, if they happened to be heated by some sullen fire, easily became monstrous. The woman was at heart a brute, the man a blackguard, but in the highest degree capable of that hideous sort of progression that can be made toward evil. There are souls that crab-like crawl continuously toward darkness, going backward in life rather than advancing, using their experience to increase their deformity, growing continually worse, and becoming steeped more and more thoroughly in an intense viciousness. That was the case with this man and this woman. So although they appear fantastic on the surface, underneath they are not good people. Okay, so next chapter we're going to start with chapter 3, the Lark. Okay, that's where we're going to start on the next video.